The Xenobiology Conference on Station Kepler 9 had attracted the galaxy's finest minds. Dr. Sarah Chen, humanity's leading expert on comparative emotional biology, stood before an auditorium filled with alien scientists, all waiting to hear about the most confusing aspect of human physiology. Tears, the question before us today, began moderator Kilthar, a floating crystalline being, is one that has puzzled xenobiologists since first contact with humans. Why do humans leak fluid from their optical organs during emotional distress? Polite clicking and humming filled the room, the galactic equivalent of agreeable murmuring. Dr. Chen has agreed to explain this. Unusual evolutionary adaptation. Sarah stepped to the podium, pulling up holographic displays. Thank you, moderator. Yes, humans cry. We leak salt water from our eyes when we experience strong emotions. But to understand why this makes us dangerous, you need to understand what crying actually is. A Vexorian scientist raised a tentacle. Dangerous? It's a stress response, a weakness. Most species evolved to suppress visible signs of distress to avoid predation. Exactly, Sarah said. Most species did. Humans didn't. And there's a reason for that. She pulled up an image of human tear ducts, magnified. Physically, tears serve multiple purposes. They lubricate eyes. They wash away irritants. They contain antibodies that fight infection. That's the baseline function, purely mechanical. But emotional tears are different, chemically distinct. They contain stress hormones like cortisol and leucine-enkephalin, a natural painkiller. When humans cry from emotion, we're literally expelling stress chemicals from our bodies. A murmur of interest. But that's not the dangerous part? Sarah continued. The dangerous part is what crying signals to other humans. She changed the display to show historical images. A mother crying over a child. Soldiers weeping at a memorial. A leader with tears streaming down their face during a speech. Crying is a communication tool. A weapon, even. Let me explain. Sarah walked to the center of the stage. When a human cries, we're sending multiple signals simultaneously. First, I am in distress. Second, I trust you enough to show vulnerability. Third, this situation has exceeded my emotional capacity. And fourth, this is the important one, I need help, and I'm not ashamed to ask for it. Why is that dangerous? Kilthar asked. Because it triggers an immediate response in other humans, mirror neurons. Empathy. When one human cries, other humans feel compelled to respond. It's hardwired into our neurology. She pulled up a study. Research shows that seeing another human cry activates the same brain regions as experiencing distress ourselves. We feel each other's pain. Literally, a Threxian psychologist stood. That sounds like a weakness. Emotional contagion would compromise group effectiveness. You'd think so, Sarah smiled. But it does the opposite. Let me tell you about September 11, 2001. The display changed to show images of that day, smoking towers. People running, chaos, terrorist attacks on Earth. Nearly 3,000 dead. The entire human world watched it happen live. And we cried, collectively. Billions of humans crying together. And then what happened? Sarah's voice grew intense. We unified. Overnight. Political differences became irrelevant. Humans who'd never met felt connected by shared grief. The crying wasn't weakness, it was a rallying cry. Within weeks, humans had reorganized entire governments, launched military operations, restructured international relations. All because we cried together first. The tears created unity. Unity created action. The audience was silent. Let me give you another example. Sarah continued, 1963. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. He cried during parts of it. So did the audience. So did millions watching. Those tears changed human history. The American Civil Rights Movement gained unstoppable momentum. Laws changed. Society transformed. All starting from a speech that made people cry. She pulled up more examples. Nelson Mandela crying as he was released from 27 years in prison. His tears inspired a nation to reconcile after apartheid. Instead of civil war, South Africa chose peace. Malala Yousafzai, shot by terrorists for advocating education for girls. She cried during her UN speech. Her tears mobilized global support for education reform. In each case, crying didn't signal weakness. It signaled that something mattered so much that emotional control became secondary to truth. Dr. Vexkor, a renowned military strategist, spoke up. Dr. Chen, are you suggesting that crying is a tactical advantage? I'm saying it's a social weapon. One that most species don't have. Sarah's expression was serious now. Let me explain with a thought experiment. Imagine two human leaders negotiating peace after a war. One leader breaks down crying, talking about the soldiers they lost, the families destroyed, the futility of continued conflict. What happens? The other leader, even if they're the enemy, experiences empathy. Mirror neurons fire. They start to feel the same grief. And suddenly, continuing the war becomes harder to justify emotionally. That's manipulation, someone objected. Maybe. Sarah agreed. But it's also honest communication. Humans evolved to share emotional states because it makes groups stronger. When we cry together, we bond. When we bond, we cooperate. When we cooperate, we become more effective. She pulled up data. Studies on human military units show that soldiers who've cried together have stronger unit cohesion, better combat effectiveness, higher survival rates. Crying doesn't make us weak, it makes us trust each other. Now imagine that on a civilization scale, Sarah said. Humans can watch something tragic happen on the other side of the planet and cry about it. Feel connected to strangers. Feel motivated to help. When the Indian Ocean tsunami hit in 2004, humans around the world cried watching the footage, and then donated over $14 billion in aid. Strangers helping strangers because tears created empathy. When a refugee crisis occurs, humans see one photograph of a crying child and mobilize political movements. Change immigration policies. Restructure international aid. The audience was beginning to look uncomfortable. You're describing emotional manipulation on a massive scale, Kilter said quietly. I'm describing human communication, Sarah corrected. Yes, tears can be used to manipulate, but they can also be genuine expressions of pain that create collective action. She changed the display to show a human infant crying. Human babies cry. Loudly. Constantly. It's annoying. It's designed to be annoying, because a crying baby gets attention, gets care, gets resources allocated to it. Adult humans retain that ability. When we cry, we're saying this matters enough to override my social conditioning to appear strong. And other humans are hardwired to respond. A crystalline ethicist spoke up. This seems manipulative. How do humans distinguish between genuine and false emotional displays? We don't always. Sarah admitted humans can fake cry. We can use tears tactically. But we've also evolved to detect false emotion fairly well. Micro-expressions. Physiological responses. Context. But here's the thing, even when we know someone is crying for effect, it often still works. Because the mirror neuron response is automatic. We feel empathy even when we know we're being manipulated. She smiled grimly. That's how effective crying is as a tool. Dr. Vexcor stood again. Dr. Chen, you've explained the mechanism. But you said this makes humans dangerous. How? Because crying is a force multiplier, Sarah said. Let me illustrate. Scenario: a human colony is attacked. Other humans see footage of survivors crying. What happens? She didn't wait for an answer. First, empathy creates immediate public support for intervention. Second, crying victims humanize the conflict, make it personal. Third, shared grief unifies disparate human factions. Fourth, emotional investment overrides cost-benefit calculations. Within hours, humans who've never met the victims are demanding action, volunteering to help, donating resources, enlisting in military service. Vexcor seemed disturbed. That's a devastating psychological warfare capability. Yes, Sarah agreed simply. It is. And we've been using it for millennia, mostly on each other. She pulled up one final image. A human astronaut floating in space, visibly crying with tears forming spheres in zero gravity. This is Commander Lisa Morrison. First human to cry in space. She was looking at Earth, thinking about how fragile it looked. How all of human history happened on that tiny blue sphere. And she cried. When this image was broadcast, it changed human space policy, increased funding for planetary protection, inspired environmental movements, changed how humans thought about their home world. One person, crying in space, and it shifted the direction of human civilization. Sarah looked around the room. So when you ask why humans cry, the answer isn't just to expel stress hormones or to communicate distress. The answer is that crying is how we create unity from tragedy. How we turn individual pain into collective action. How we build empathy bridges between strangers. It's one of our greatest evolutionary advantages, and one of the reasons humans can organize on planetary scales across billions of individuals, despite being tribal apes who evolved in groups of 150 while cry together. And crying together makes us trust each other, and trust makes us cooperate, and cooperation makes us unstoppable. The conference room was silent for a long moment. Then Kilter spoke. Dr. Chen, I believe I speak for many here when I say, this is deeply unsettling. Why? Because it suggests that human emotions aren't weaknesses to be managed, but weapons to be deployed. Sarah's expression was complicated. Both, actually. Crying makes us vulnerable. It exposes our pain, but it also connects us to others. Makes us stronger together. That duality, vulnerability as strength, is very human. And yes, it makes us dangerous. Because an enemy might expect us to hide pain, suppress emotion, present strength. But instead, we cry. We show our wounds. We make you feel our suffering, and then you either help us, or you become the thing that made us cry. And trust me, you don't want to be that, because humans remember what makes us cry. We remember who helped and who didn't. We remember who caused the tears and who wiped them away. And we act accordingly. A young Vexorian student asked quietly, "Dr. Chen, do you cry?" Sarah paused, then nodded. "Yes, I cried yesterday actually, watching footage of the refugee camp on Kepler 4, seeing the children who'd lost their families. And what did you do after crying? I donated a month's salary to the relief effort. I contacted 3 colleagues to organize a medical mission. I wrote to my government representative demanding increased aid." Sarah smiled sadly. "The tears didn't solve anything, but they motivated me to try. That's what human tears do. They convert pain into purpose." The conference ended shortly after, but the recording of Dr. Chen's presentation spread across the galaxy, and alien civilizations watching it came to a disturbing conclusion. Humans weren't dangerous because they were strong. They were dangerous because they could be vulnerable together. They could share pain across billions of individuals and turn that shared pain into unified action. They could cry watching strangers suffer and then mobilize resources to help those strangers. They could see injustice, weep about it, and then restructure their entire civilization to prevent it from happening again. Tears weren't weakness. Tears were the mechanism by which humans transformed individual suffering into collective determination. And that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they couldn't be hurt, but because hurting them made them stronger. Together, 3 months later, the Galactic Council received Earth's proposal for a galaxy-wide humanitarian aid organization. The proposal included footage of human suffering, people crying, children weeping, families mourning. The Council approved the proposal unanimously, not because they understood human tears, but because after watching the footage, they felt something they'd never expected: empathy. And they didn't know if that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, or its most insidious weapon. Probably both. Very human, that.